Stangibelisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1, GV, Whiskey 1, Good Vibrations. I'd like to ask you a question about operating from the tropic zone, that is between latitudes south 23½ degrees and north 23½ degrees, or between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, with a little bit of exceptions. Hawaii, some of that is in the tropics, some of it isn't. Generally speaking, though, if you live in the tropics or have gone to the tropics and operated at VHF and or UHF from that region, how does propagation differ from the way that wave propagation occurs in the temperate zone? Now, usually at VHF, propagation is by means of tropospheric modes, ducting, scatter, and refraction or bending. And the same is true at UHF. VHF, very high frequencies by definition, 30 to 300 megahertz. UHF by definition, 300 megahertz to 3 gigahertz. In the lower part of the lower frequency part of the VHF band, for example 50 megahertz, you will occasionally see ionospheric propagation. Occasionally, but not too often. But it does happen, I think, more often in the tropics than it does at higher latitudes. And I'm kind of conducting a survey, if you want to accuse me of that. But I think a lot of viewers are curious. And I might include in this definition trans-equatorial propagation. That is to say, if one station lives on one side of the equator or operates from one side of the equator and the other station from the other side of the equator. And this also includes just listening. What have you heard? You don't necessarily have to transmit, but what have you heard? And how does propagation differ from, for example, if one station lives in Edmonton, Canada, and the other station lives in, let's just say Fairbanks, Alaska. Or one station lives in Chile, for example, in the temperate zone, at the very southern tip, Tierra del Fuego, is it called? And the other station might live on one of the islands somewhere offshore of there. Those would be in the so-called temperate latitudes between 23½ degrees and 66½ degrees, roughly north and south. How does propagation differ if you live in the tropics as opposed to the temperate zone? As if Tierra del Fuego is temperate. Well, to some it may be. However, VHF and UHF as defined, you don't necessarily have to be a radio ham, you can just like to listen, although I don't think there are too many people who just listen around at, say, in the 220 megahertz ham radio band, like shortwave listeners might listen on 12 megahertz or something like that. However, be that as it may, question asked, answers sought. Stangibelisco, W1GV, saying 73 and so long, which, in my native fist, even at UHF, always translates to da-da-da-da-da-da.